Hello and welcome. I'm Ellie Richardson and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some breaking news of this hour. BNP expresses confidence in forming government after landmark poll. Opposition says won't engage in obstructive politics. World leaders congratulate Tariq Rahman. President Trump warns Iran of a very traumatic outcome without a nuclear deal. He expressed hope for progress in the next month following his White House meeting with Netanyahu. North Korea vows a terrible response to any further drone incursions from the south. Seoul denied official involvement in the January incident, attributing it to civilians. Officials announced the conclusion of the immigration enforcement operation in Minneapolis. A congressional hearing reviewed ICE's presence, while a judge ruled that detainees were denied access to lawyers. Obama says US less safe after Trump reverses Obama-era ruling that greenhouse gases endanger public health. The White House called the reversal the largest deregulation in American history, saying it would make cars cheaper. US President Donald Trump says the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu should receive a pardon for corruption charges, saying Israeli President Isaac Herzog should be ashamed of himself for not granting one. Russia fully blocks US messenger app WhatsApp, owned by Meta Platforms, for failing to comply with local law, suggesting Russians turn to a state-backed national messenger instead. NASA's set to launch 4 astronauts to the International Space Station, replacing a crew that was evacuated earlier due to a medical issue. The pre-dawn launch was delayed by 2 days over adverse weather forecasts across the US East Coast. And for your top story this hour, people in Dhaka are expressing hope for peace and stability after the Bangladesh Nationalist Party BNP secured a decisive 2/3 majority in the general elections on Friday. The victory is expected to bring stability after months of unrest following the ouster of former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina in the Gen Z-led uprising. The outcome is seen as key to restoring stability in Bangladesh, which was faced months of unrest that disrupted industries like garments. Latest election counts show that the BNP and its allies have won at least 212 of the 299 seats. The opposition, Jamaati Islami, and its allies secured 70 seats. BNP leader Tariq Rahman, who recently returned from exile, is expected to be sworn in as Prime Minister. Let's listen in to what citizens had to say.
হ্যাঁ, অন্যান্যবার তুলনায় এইবার খুব ভালো হয়েছে, শান্তিপূর্ণ নির্বাচন হয়েছে, কোনো ঝামেলা হয় নাই, ভোট কেন্দ্র কোনো ঝামেলা হয়নি বা ভোট দিয়ে।
President Donald Trump announced the revocation of landmark scientific finding that supports US climate regulations aimed at reducing planet warming pollution. Trump criticized the finding, calling it baseless in both fact and law. The president also confirmed the repeal of green vehicle emission standards, terminating rules imposed on vehicle models and engines between 2012 and 2027. Environmental Protection Agency Administrator Lee Zeldin stated that this move would end features like the unpopular start-stop engine system. Let's listen in.
Under the process just completed by the EPA, we are officially terminating the so-called endangerment finding, a disastrous Obama-era policy that severely damaged the American auto industry and massively drove up prices for American consumers. Prices went up incredibly for a worse product. This action will eliminate over $1.3 trillion of regulatory costs and help bring car prices tumbling down dramatically. In 4 years under the Biden administration, the price of a new and used car rose more than 22%, all to facilitate the Green New Scam without achieving any meaningful impact on the environment, but making the car worse. That is why, effective immediately, we are repealing the ridiculous endangerment finding and terminating all additional green emission standards imposed unnecessarily on vehicle models and engines between 2012 and 2027 and beyond. This action will save American consumers trillions of dollars.
Meanwhile, former US President Barack Obama on Thursday criticized President Donald Trump's decision to repeal a landmark scientific finding that supports climate regulations. Obama warned that removing the endangerment finding would make Americans less safe, less healthy, and harder efforts to combat climate change. Issued under Obama's administration, the endangerment finding determined that greenhouse gases harm public health and welfare, and by driving climate change while benefiting the fossil fuel industry. We are now being joined by Dr. Asta Chadha, who's an Associate Professor of International Relations, who's joining us from Japan. Thank you so much for joining us here today on NewsX World. If the legal basis for regulating greenhouse gases has been removed, what happens to existing climate and vehicle emissions rule?
I mean, if you just listen to how, and you just played, President Trump's version of how the entire auto industry was suffering under these legal obligations. So by removing these legal obligations, apparently the administration wants to save these trillions of dollars at the cost of public health, which had been earlier ruled as, being one of the leading cause of respiratory problems. How are they going to implement it? Most probably they're going to relax these certain standards that have been set on automakers, for instance, with regard to how much emissions per vehicles are allowed, for also in terms of whether or not they need to eliminate these off-cycle credits, whether or not they need an automatic start-stop engine function, so on and so forth. So I think it's going to start off like this, but we should be looking at the bigger, the bigger question and the primary justifications apart from cost saving. And there are other justifications for this too coming in from the administration. They seem to be empowering, they say, in some way the consumer, right? So this is no longer about questioning whether greenhouse gases actually impact adversely public health. This is a question of who gets to make the choice of paying more in terms of health or paying more in terms of money for the same product, which is the cars and things from the automobile industry. And then the third aspect, which I think that the administration has not addressed at all when they went ahead to repeal this, is what is going to be the major implication for the US economy and climate security. I mean, in the short run, yes, the lower manufacturing cost for these traditional gas-powered cars might flood the American markets. People might have a higher purchasing capability in terms of these cars, but US automakers are most likely to fall way behind in this global electronic vehicle race, specifically against China. And this also creates a very important issue of regulatory uncertainty in the United States. So earlier there was this law, today it has been repealed. It's very unlikely that the future administrations, if they do not hold the same ideas as this administration, and it's unlikely that they would want to continue with this policy. So if they want to continue with a climate security related policy, future administrations would want to likely reinstate these rules once again, making any long-term investment into automaker business unreliable. That whole regulatory environment will be pulled into question. Then what about the climate security? Yes, there might be trillions of dollars saved, but what about 7 billion tons of planet-warming emissions? over the decades? What would be the impact on people's health? What are the US government policies with regard to combating these climate security related issues, whether it's for people's personal health or for the environmental health? And then lastly, can US really be depended upon anymore as being one of the major economies who had earlier taken a stand for climate security? Rather, I mean, on the contrary, I would say US is potentially isolating itself from international climate pacts. So, I mean, overall, it looks like a very bleak picture. But if you look at it from the short-run perspective, it would probably potentially benefit, the U.S. economy and its automakers with a lower manufacturing cost, as the administration stated earlier.
And you just touched on about the public health risks. What could this mean for air quality in the US? Public health risks, future climate risks. What could this all mean for the US?
I mean, again, a very important question you raised there. We need to also bring into account that it is not just the emissions, but the other, environmental issues that are concurrently occurring in the United States, and those that severely risk environmental security, ecological health of the country, as well as people's health. We're talking about heat waves, we're talking about wildfires, we're talking about respiratory illnesses called by not just caused by the greenhouse gases, but also associated pollutants. And currently, I mean, if the current administration's perspective is that the consumers must be allowed to buy a cheaper product by paying it in a way with their health, they're risking a lot.
Thank you so much, Dr. Asta, for joining us here today on NewsX World. We have some breaking news for you now. A Russian drone attack has killed one person and injured 6 others at a port in Ukraine's Odesa region, according to Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister Oleksiy Kylyba. The attack, which targeted port and railway infrastructure, also caused significant damage to business facilities, fertilizer warehouses, and vehicles, sparking a fire. Kylyba added that the strike disrupted power, heat, and water supplies in the region. In the area, which includes vital Black Sea and Danube ports, has frequently been targeted in the recent weeks. Railway infrastructure in the Dnipropetrovsk region was also hit. Next up, a federal judge in Minnesota has ordered US Immigration and Customs Enforcement to ensure detainees can access their attorneys after finding that thousands were blocked from legal counsel during a recent enforcement surge. The ruling, issued by US District Judge Nancy Brassel, a Trump appointee, stems from a class action lawsuit filed on January the 27th on behalf of detainees affected by Operation Metro Surge. Judge Brassel found that ICE's policies, rapidly transferring detainees out of state, limiting phone access, and holding people in facilities not designed for long-term detention, all but extinguished a detainee's access to counsel. The order, in effect for 14 days while proceedings continue, requires ICE to allow attorney-client visits, private phone calls, and halt abrupt transfers. Democracy Forward, the non-profit behind the lawsuit, criticised ICE for deliberately evading accountability and violating constitutional rights. Reports included detainees sharing flip phones in large cells with only 2 minutes per call, and many being transferred across multiple states without notice. We are now being joined again by retired Lieutenant Colonel Himashni Singh, who's a Defence and International Relations Analyst, joining us from New Delhi. Thank you so much for joining us here today. What did the judge find? So obviously we know that ICE wasn't allowing them to phone calls and lawyers and just basic rights. But what is this overruling from this judge? What can this now bring to the people? Sorry, I think you are on mute.
Good afternoon, Ellie.
Good afternoon.
See, the development unfolding in Minnesota, they represent a profound confrontation over the rule of law and constitutional rights and the limits of federal enforcement power. We know for months ICE has been operating in the Twin Cities, and they have mobilized thousands of agents in Minnesota, which has disrupted the communities and provoked political backlash and strained local institutions. So what we see that now the fundamental legal issue is before the courts, and whether the government operational choices during the campaign comport with institutional rights, or it's a stake. So at stake is the Fifth Amendment right to counsel, and it is a bedrock principle that people are facing detention and possible removal from proceedings. They must get meaningful and confidential access to the lawyers, which was denied to them. So the bench of Judge Nancy Brussel, it has issued an emergency restraining order, requiring immediate corrective steps. They have allowed private phone calls to attorneys and accurate legal information upon detention. So this gives, quite a relief to people who are put in jail. More than 4,000 people are in jail. So this will also allow a halt on transfers for at least 72 hours of the custody, and signaling that the constitutional protections cannot be treated as optional conveniences. So I think US Constitution does not permit the government to arrest thousands and then disregard their legal rights, because it is difficult to honor them. So somewhere the constitutional rights of people have been upheld. And why it matters for various reasons. It is the legal precedent and accountability. Somewhere it reaffirms that federal enforcement operations are still bound by procedural safeguards amidst the heightened security campaigns. The Trump-appointed judge issuing such a rebuke indicates that constitutional norms retain transactional across all the ideological lines. And moreover, this also shows the operational integrity versus the constitutional right. So somewhere it highlights how administrative tactics such as rapid detainee transfers without notice can undermine legal defense effort, and the concerns regarding security and human rights were raised. So I feel, it will also have a political and community fallout. But I think Operation Metro Surge has catalyzed political resistance within Minnesota, including the lawsuit from state and government asserting that federal campaigns violate constitutional and statutory boundaries of federal authority. So as this case progresses, we will see that a lot of accountability will be held, and legal challenges will be there. But however, we see that the judges are not there to allow ICE upholding and define. The courts will uphold the orders, and they will not allow the ICE to define the legal orders. Ellie.
Thank you, Himanshi, for joining us, but don't go too far, as we will be back with you very shortly. Venezuela's National Assembly has postponed the final debate on a landmark amnesty bill that could have led to release of hundreds of political prisoners. Lawmakers failed to agree on key articles, delaying the second and final vote on the highly anticipated legislation. The bill, first backed in an initial reading last week, aims to grant clemency to people detained for political reasons, but disagreements over its scope has stalled progress. Critics and relatives of detainees have been pressing for swift action. The debate is expected to resume next week. Listen in.
Diputados que estén a favor con el diferimiento de la discusión en segunda instancia del proyecto de ley de amnistía para la convivencia democrática, quedando aprobado hasta el artículo número 6, sírvanse manifestarlo con la señal de costumbre. Queda aprobado por unanimidad. Continuaremos la discusión en la próxima sesión ordinaria la semana próxima.
We are now being joined again by retired Lieutenant Colonel Himanshi Singh. Thank you for joining us back here today on NewsX World. What disagreements or sticking points are lawmakers trying to resolve before continuing this debate?
See, trust is a luxury, and what we are dealing in is verification. Delay is a sign of internal power struggle. So what we see here is that, the final debate on amnesty law could clear charges against hundreds of political prisoners, including people jailed for protest of dissent. So I think the draft law has shifted from broad sweeping amnesty to more limited scope, including serious crimes, that is like human rights violations, and completing and automatic release. So opposition demonstrations are still going on. Families demand full release of detainees, which is around, I think, 600 people. They are still imprisoned. So despite hundreds of being freed, I think some people are being detained on political motives. So this is a setback because a opposition leader like John Pablo, and he's being released and repeatedly re-detained, then highlighting, the internal crisis in the country. So somewhere what we see in Venezuela, that the legal process is more about a human story. For decades, the dissent was criminalized and voices were silent behind the bars. But today, Venezuelans are asking a simple question, that will justice replace repression, which we don't see because the amnesty bill was meant to address these wounds, which has been postponed. So now lack of need because of the political hesitation and legal complicities have actually created a furor. See, families of prisoners are not talking about aberrations. They want the brothers, sisters, and fathers and neighbors to be out immediately, but it is only happening on paper. So that is why people, when they remain imprisoned, I think the political crisis is going to worsen in Venezuela, and political prisoners, they have to come out because their human rights are being violated blatantly. So I think possibility does exist, but it does not guarantee that. So it will be the final bill on amnesty which will be needed, and it has to align with the human right obligation and international pressure, which must remain consistent. Otherwise, there will be no clear mechanism to ensure the release, whether it is conditional or reversible. So let's hope that Venezuela will come out from the pages of regression towards the more meaningful reconciliation. Ellie.
Thank you. Stay with us as we will be back with you very shortly. In a historic visit to Venezuela, US Energy Secretary Chris Wright toured oil facilities with acting President Delcy Rodriguez on Thursday. The visit marks a significant shift in relations, with the two leaders discussing investments in Venezuela's oil sector. Wright announced plans to invest over $100 million to upgrade the country's oil facilities, aiming to double production in the next 12 to 18 months. This marks a new chapter in US-Venezuela relations, which have been strained for years. The visit follows a recent series of political reforms in Venezuela, including a new amnesty plan for political prisoners. We're now being joined again by retired Lieutenant Colonel Himanshi Singh. Thank you for joining us back here. How does this visit reflect the broader shift in US-Venezuela relations following changes in Venezuela's leadership and recent policy reforms?
Ellie, we all know that Rodriguez is sitting because President Trump wants her to be in the power. So arrival of US Energy Secretary Chris Wright to meet with acting President Delcy Rodriguez, it marks a high-level American presence since the embassy closure in Venezuela that was done in 2019. And more crucially, since US Special Forces have captured Nicolas Maduro earlier this year, the Trump administration is playing a high-stake game of commerce over combat. As the Secretary Wright also said that, you can transform a national trajectory more effectively through trades than the boot on ground. But see, if we see the friction point, while the US Treasury is lifting license to companies like Chevron expand, Venezuela's legislature is simultaneously delaying the debates on Amnesty International or the amnesty to the people. So somewhere we see that, US capital is trying to fix the oil sector, but they are not ready to hand over the keys to the palace. So the thing is very, very delicate, and from US perspective, they are looking at maximum pressure to strategic engagement. However, we know that global markets of oil, they remain volatile, and stabilizing a world's largest proven oil reserve, and as you brought out, that to double the production of oil, it remains the priority of Trump administration. So I think they would like to re-establish the diplomatic ties, and they will also try that by doing the production in a maximum way, they can also silent China, because maximum oil was being taken from Venezuela by China. So they want to actually, somewhere curb the China growing power also, because oil for loan agreement was signed, and now it is sidelined by US, which was done between China and Venezuela. So I think in geopolitics, pragmatism always outlines idealism, and US priority remains the energy security as of the moment, because they also know the failed state of world's largest oil is a biggest threat to US interest in case the situation is delayed. So Washington is betting on economic integration, which will eventually force the hand of democracy in years to come.
Thank you, Himanshi, for joining us here today on NewsX World. Portugal's Parliament has approved a bill on its first reading requiring explicit parental consent for children aged 13 to 16 to access social media, in one of the first concrete legislative moves in Europe to impose such restrictions. Authors of the draft legislation from the ruling Social Democratic Party have said that it is needed to protect children from cyberbullying, harmful content and predatory individuals. According to reports, a public system known as Digital Mobile Key will be used by parents to give consent, also helping to enforce the existing ban for children under the age of 13 to access digital social media, video and image sharing platforms, or online betting sites. However, tech providers are also required to implement an age verification system compatible with the DMK. The bill has been approved by 148 to 69 votes, with 13 abstentions, and can still be modified before the final vote. US President Donald Trump is planning to scale back tariffs on steel and aluminium imports, according to the reports. Last year, Trump imposed tariffs on up to 50% of those goods, including duties on non-steel and non-aluminium content. The administration is now reviewing the list of affected products and plans to exempt certain items. Instead of expanding the tariff list, the government will launch more targeted national security probes into specific goods. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer is expected to call for a multifunctional defence initiative at this weekend's Munich Security Conference. According to reports, Starmer will propose a joint weapons procurement plan that could reduce rearmament costs for Britain and its Western allies. He is also set to push for closer defence cooperation during his speech on Saturday and in private discussions with other leaders at the three-day event. This proposal comes after the UK's refusal to contribute financially to a European defence fund earlier this month. Starmer had previously stated that his government would consider applying for a potential second European Union defence fund to strengthen Europe's security. That's all we have time for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.